said, and they were stopping. Nobody was the pro. They weren't. They were down. They weren't going to do any more trapping for the year, and we just said that we didn't want to stop. We thought there was some, cause to continue exploring, why there were so many crab in this area, and we have been noticing more and more crab shells, as they, we call them sheds anyway, molds. And hearing from oyster growers and that there was indeed an increase in numbers, people were seeing them more. We started just trapping. We started in the Palyx. We started in Willapa Meadow up in, outside of South Bend. We really, I won't say we didn't know what we were doing, but we just started from scratch. First traps we had we took oyster baskets, these aqua purses that we had found over the seasons that we had, they were on the shoreline, modified them, put cones in them, and then we contacted Sea Grant and also DFW. They had a guy working in trapping all their trapping was done from the land base, and we worked with them there. They worked with us, and we got a little bit more sophisticated about what we were doing. We trapped through the winter, expanded our ground through the spring. Well, we've been trapping it weekly since then. The shoal waters, they started trapping more intensively up in the north part of the bay there, and I would say mid to 2021, and the numbers really started to increase. This was from the Tokeland Marina, going I guess northwest up towards the reservation. I mean, we were getting much larger numbers. And we were increasing our territory to what we call the reclamation area out of South Bend, also on the other side of the river. And we're, as we were doing Spartina, we're also trapping throughout the bay. I will say we found green crab everywhere we've put traps. This is even on the Nasau River, not in any quantity, but we haven't, they are bay wide. Through getting on to fall of 21, I'm trying to think of when Washoga, when you guys.
So early on in 2020, when the first budget request was put together, we supported the state getting money to start working on the green crab issue, specifically down here on the coast. We wanted to see an effort down here, and that was kind of slow to roll out. And we continued to work with Fish and Wildlife to get resources down here. And then in the early part of this year, one of the companies started trapping pretty heavily over in the Nakata area, and the numbers we saw there were pretty much staggering. And at that point, instead of waiting for the new legislative funds to be approved for the request, we started pushing harder to get funding, and trapping started immediately down here once we saw how bad it was. And that was February of this year. And then that trapping took off from there pretty much every 4 days to 3-4 days there, spearheaded by one company. And with that, the shocking results, we were able to show Fish and Wildlife that, yeah, there's a major green crab infestation here, way worse than we ever would have imagined in this one, at least in this one location. And that pushed for an effort to get trapping started, and then get funding down here specifically to growers to trap their lands. And that request took a while to get started, but things started moving pretty fast once we started communicating pretty regularly. And after that, we got currently approved for funding kind of as a stopgap between now and the new biennium, which starts July 1, to assist the shellfish industry for trapping in Willapa Bay and Grace Harbor. And that included the state providing several hundred traps, funding for bait, and then the farmers will be reimbursed for their labor and boat costs and other expenses that come up, including more trap purchases. So then Mike asked me this morning to provide some results, and I ran in my office real fast, which is right there. And I looked at the trapping efforts that expanded by April. And at that point, we had the trap standard from Fish and Wildlife. And I got them out to as many companies that were interested in participating. And currently 11 companies out of about half the membership is interested in trapping green crab. And 5 of them started trapping April 1st. And so I have numbers from those 5 companies, and I'll just kind of combine them all together, except for one company. So out of those 5 companies trapping, and they're basically they trap their priority lands, basically areas they want to trap green crabs. So they're not looking all over the place for green crabs like Ed Zephyrd is. They're actually just targeting their valuable croplands. And those companies in the month of April got 1,600 crabs. So it's a pretty good number that's spread out throughout a couple other areas. And then there's one company that is consistently got since February 100 crabs a day. And as of what month is this? As of May 15th or 16th, last time I looked, they were a little over 10,000, which is at just over 100 days of trapping. Do you want to talk about it at all?
Sure.
I can go into it some more of it, but you're here.
I can talk about it.
So the one company that's been doing that kind of spearheaded the effort and got a lot of the attention to it was Warren Cow with Willapa Bay Shellfish. And he's in an area that he can explain some more, but it seems to be one of these hot spots. And I think we've identified a couple more in Willapa Bay, but Warren can talk more about kind of the hot spot and what he's been doing and what he's been seeing, if you would. Thank you.
Okay, I'm Warren Powell. I'm a Willapa Bay Shellfish. I'm a clam and oyster farmer, primarily clam farmer. We've seen our clam harvest drop off for the last 3 years, wondering why. And I'm also the chair of the City County Noxious Weed Control Board and neighbors with Ed Archer. So talking with Ed and looking for reasons why our clam harvests are dropping off, and talking to Ed and finding out, as a chair of the weed control board, that Ed had trapped, well, the combined effort was over 10,000 crabs, right, in 21?
Yeah,
Okay, so over 10,000 crab in 21 the whole Willapa Bay, and this was a side gig that Ed was doing, and so if you found over 10,000, I'm thinking to myself, well, this is something we have to explore and see if this is a possible cause of why our clam harvests are going down, why we're not getting survival in our beds. So I borrowed some traps from City County, which, as I said, I'm the chair of the Noxious Weed Control Board and its neighbors. So I borrowed a few traps to put out and see, are there any crabs in my clam bed? Well, first time out, we were getting 20, 30 to a trap, with a handful of traps. And where this location is directly north of the dredged part of Nakata, the Port Peninsula, Port Nakata. It's where the dredging stops on the north edge. Come up above, I've got a clam bed, and then more importantly, Coast Civic Seafoods, they hold over their oyster shell bags, thousands, tens of thousands of them, on a small area, 5 acres. And so, which I believe now at this point is why we have so many in this one spot. I've been trapping in that one spot, about 10 acres, and we're up over 10,000 crab this year in one spot, 10 acres. So my guys yesterday got 369 crab. So we're not getting close to the end of this, even in this one spot. But Coast Oysters is pulling these shell bags out that have been sitting there for 9 months. And these shell bags not only provide shelter, but there's an ecosystem with them, eels, fish, snails, all kinds of other things that the crab can eat, Dungeness crab. And this is my own theory, that this is a perfect habitat for them. So we started adding more traps. I bought traps, myself. This is before any funding was even, on the horizon, as far as I was concerned. Bought some traps, got my guys, we went out, we dug in that area so that we could dig and trap, because we're a for-profit business, and we're doing this on a volunteer basis. I've received 0 funds. I have had some bait donated, but, so we're digging the bed, and we're catching crabs, so the guys can check traps and dig clams, and we can go out. They're getting so many crab, they stop packing them to the shore. They put them in bags like we do our clams, put buoys on them, go out at high tide and pull the crab up the bags of crabs. So I started a Facebook page, Bulldog Green Crab Disaster.
Hello, this is Nancy.
I did this for awareness, to let people know that,
What is going on?
to let people know, it's strictly for awareness, because I heard that this was in the plans, and this was in the plans, and this was in the plans. From day one in February, when I started trapping, I was getting gravid females. Okay, so in a little bit of research that I did, the gravid females can have up to 200, can lay up to 200 eggs. I have 200,000 eggs. 250,000. Well, at any rate, I don't know what the survival rate is, but to me, the thought was every gravid female I pull out of the bay is a lot of work, and I'm gonna have to do in 3-4 years from now. So we went at it hard and heavy, to be honest, without a permit, without permission. To save, first and foremost, it started out to save our clam bed, but then it grew into something bigger. And that's why I got the awareness, started talking to Ed, David Bagley, and said, hey, this is a forest fire here. We need to get on this now. This is not something that can wait. And the efforts that we can do right now are gonna save us a lot of trouble 2, 3, 4 years down the road, and I don't know where the tipping point is, and I still don't. I'm told by people smarter than myself about green crab that we're not to the tipping point, that we can still trap them and control them. And we're working under that assumption, or I wouldn't be doing it. What have I left out? We're at, our last 2 goals were we've gotten over 700 crab in the last 4 days. So we're a long ways from hitting the bottom on the spot. And we've trapped in the same spot for almost, about 100 days. We've been there since February. And we still haven't, we don't see the end, we don't see any light at the end of the tunnel yet, for this spot. And I don't think we will until all of last year's seed bags are pulled off of there. Then I think we'll be able to trap down to a sustainable amount. What am I forgetting?
No, I'm just gonna jump in here real quick before Ed, and then we're gonna come back to Ed. But to put it in perspective, because I noticed that we're talking right away, like, assuming you guys all know what European green crab is and what's going on. European green crab are the 3rd most invasive species on the planet. So it's a really bad situation. And I just pulled up numbers from Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife on some of their records. And to put it in perspective on the numbers of crabs they've been catching. So in 1998, they surveyed and found 20, what's that? Well, actually it's about 30 crab. Then from 2000 to 2004 was practically none. Little spike in 2005 to about 26 crab. Then I went back down to where they weren't catching. This is all at one site that they were sampling in the northern part of the peninsula. But then in 2014, it started to uptick to where in 2018 they had trapped or caught, looks like about 250. So when you're talking about 250 crab going from about 30 crab to 250 within a year or 2, and now 3-4 years later, we're talking thousands this affects the whole bay. And it's not just here, they're finding it, Hood Canal, they just found some green crab there. It's up in northern Puget Sound. So I just want to give some perspective before, I mean, as these guys are talking, because they're talking strictly about what we're doing in Willapa Bay right now, but I just want to know a little background.
Can I, quick question on the microphone, what is the specific resource that they're out competing other species for?
Everything,
So space, but also food, what is the specific food?
everything.
Back east, they have destroyed a lot of the shellfish industry in several states. And then when they're done, they take over. They outbreed, they just consume everything. And when they're done, if there's not enough native species to consume, they'll start on themselves.
And for the Dutchess crab, if they have run into a Dutchess crab that's smaller than themselves, they will kill and devour that crab. And then it was assumed that if a Dungey was bigger, that they wouldn't do it, but we found, I saw some pictures where a larger Dungey had all its legs chewed off.
Probably molting or something.
Anyway, talk about what you can do.
Okay, I just want to say, Warren is definitely a poster child. That may not be there for what needs to be accomplished by being not only by being proactive and just going out and taking care of his grounds, which also, improves, not helps, maybe helps his lot, but also is beneficial for the bay too. And if everybody had his energy and dedication, that's what's going to be needed from landowners, especially commercial and like the refuge and state agencies too. People have just kind of got to get in on this and get on it hard. Let me update you on what's going on in the northern part. We've been working very closely with the Shoalwater tribe. This is Pacific County. We have a partnership and it's worked out very well. To date, and this is in 22 so far together, but 90% of it has been up on their ground, some county ground. We've gotten over 7,500 EGC. Last week in one day, they got 750, and that's in 40 traps. In 3 days, I got over 1,500 with their numbers this year. They've also gotten close to 300 gravid females, which are females carrying eggs. And each female, I don't know what the word, a gravid female, that's capable of almost 200,000 larvae. And it's said, I've read that they can do this twice a year. So this is basically the first year that we can really get accurate information, assessment, and possibly control in certain hotspots. Off the Port of Nakata where Warren is, and up in the Shoalwater County area, up on the north part of the bay, the crab are just very heavy out there. We're doing assessment work all over the bay, but resources are limited. I mean, it's trying to find, labor is one thing. I mean, it's finding people who can willing to do this and not for year round. It's a complex and challenging situation. I want to say about funding, when I'm saying the Shoalwaters received no funding for their efforts, which is perplexing to me considering the money that's been allotted up north. But I will not go into that one.
I don't know anything about it.
Well, between the macaws and the Lummies, who are getting millions. But anyway, we've gotten a few contributions from MRC and also Pacific PCF Foundation that Kathleen Sayes heads, but largely county's done this on their own dime. Funding is looking up.
Pacific County Foundation.
Thank you. Yeah. We are, I will say that our DF, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife there's funding that looks, we're expecting some, and it's kind of I won't say convoluted, but it's a process that's working out now, and hopefully this will lead to more traps, more people, more, and whatever we need to kind of see what we got and deal with it.
So on my end, Fish and Wildlife has had, I think, 3 trap deliveries down here where they brought trailers down full of traps. I've met with farmers that are interested, and I've checked out traps, different kinds, depending on what they want to do. If it's deep water trapping they want to do, or near shore. We got contracts in place for bait, so the farmers don't have to buy bait on their own anymore. And there's it's all stored in the cod in a freezer at the Fish and Wildlife office where they can pick it up anytime. There's also freezers there for them to drop off the crabs that they've caught, so that the state can dispose of the crabs after they've been humanely frozen. I think the funding is going to be pretty solid moving forward. Hopefully it continues to be that way. We'll see how it goes. At any given time, right now, there's anywhere between 150 to 250 traps in the bay, depending on how many people are farming and working and trapping, including in Grace Harbor. We have one member up there that's trapping up there, and they're getting about 500 crabs a month up there with one crew trapping 2 to 4 trips a month, and with 2 people. And the number of traps, I believe, is a dozen. So that gives you, Grace Harbor has a lot of crabs too, and they're just getting started up there.
So could you guys explain the difference of the different kinds of traps? What
Sure.
you're finding out with it?
So historically, green crab research uses a trap that's kind of, internationally known as a Fukui trap that was developed in Japan, and they're used throughout the world for predominantly research purposes. But it's a folding trap that's pretty lightweight, and you can carry a lot of them on a boat. They've been using them up and down the West Coast here for 20 plus years for research. And that is one of the traps that we are using and utilizing here. Those have been purchased by Fish and Wildlife or farmers here to trap them. They've also found that other traps work sometimes better, sometimes worse, depending on the habitat and the size of the crabs. So a lot of the crabs, when they're smaller near shore, are really susceptible to being caught in minnow traps. So we're using those along the tidal channels up near the grass, and that gets the crabs that are around 50 cents or silver dollar size more often than the Fukui traps. The farmers are down where they're farming oysters and clams, which is a little lower tidal elevations typically, and they're using both the Fukui traps, which are only pretty much accessible at low tide because they're putting them on the tidelands and staking them down. And they're also moving into, spot prawn or commercial shrimp traps like you'd see in Puget Sound. And those seem to be heavier and more robust and work pretty well at catching the 3+-year-old crabs. And those are pretty popular trap. And we just took a delivery of those from Fish and Wildlife of 100 of them. And so far I've got 50 of them out in the bay right now. And those are the 3 primary traps. The farmers have experimented with bait, everything from clam guts to dead crabs to mackerel, squid, and now we're using sardines, right? And I think everybody's happy with the sardines, and the big one with that is just that they're smaller fish, so they're frozen in blocks. They're easier to put in the traps and to cut them up. But we've had good success with mackerel too, as I recall. So I'm also collaborating with other groups on the green crab issue, trying to help with the continuing support for the long-term data sets. This is more research related. And the lead on that is Washington Sea Grant. And they've got some sites here, including one of them up in Stagpole that they've been trapping since the 90s continuously. So it's a long-term data set. So I'm working with Sea Grant and Fish and Wildlife. We trap that once a month throughout the year. And those traps are 100% research-based. It's not really a removal effort. And we use 6 traps with mackerels bait. And we're going through and looking at all the species of fish, crabs and size classes, and then we're also looking for molt surveys on that area to see if there's other crabs present. And that's going to continue on until I believe September of this year, and it's going to been years from now. And that adds to that long-term data set that Mike talked about earlier. That's going to show us when the crabs are first detected, and they're using that as kind of like their population dynamics, where they can look at size classes and also monitor when new recruits and larvae settle out into the shorelines. And then the other part of that where we're getting more work and more research involved is, farmers ask me lots of questions that often don't have the answer to. And one of them is, what are the impacts of green crabs? And on the West Coast, that's really poorly understood. And, the invasion is really new, and we don't know what the impacts are. We've seen what's happened on the East Coast and what that happened to the soft shell clam, commercial clam fisheries over there. And we've seen what happens to eelgrass beds over there in the pictures in before and after, but we haven't got a clear idea what's going to happen here on the West Coast, Willapa Bay specifically. And I've been soliciting, trying to get, looking at researchers look at clam populations and recruitment and survival to see if the green crab are having an effect on that. Still trying to find some ideas on that, on how to best approach that research. And the other one is I'm working with Sea Grant. We wrapped up the field work last summer. And what we did was put together a small funded project locally here that is specifically trapping green crabs using those research traps, the Pakui traps, the minnow traps, on clam grounds. And the thought is that we can specifically target these crabs that are found in these locations and bring them back to a lab and look at their stomach contents. And obviously when crabs eat, they're not like a fish where they swallow their prey whole. They macerate it and shoot up in little pieces. So this work is all going to be done through a PCR DNA analysis. And so we're waiting on the results of that right now. There's a huge backlog of sample containers to run them through the machine and all that stuff due to COVID, but we haven't got the results. We're thinking late July or early August is when we'll know that. And so what we'll be able to do with that is we'll be able to go, these green crab are on this clam bed. It's a 40-acre clam bed. There's no other habitat, or another three-dimensional habitat under. What were they eating? And then to compare that, we've also retained a small amount of Dungeness crab to kind of compare the stomach contents between the two to see which ones, what is eating what out there, and we'll know that soon. That's kind of the current two research projects going on.
So Ed, you wanted to explain the process of, you catch the crab, but there's a procedure on what you're supposed to do as far as reporting and all that. You want to tell a little bit about that?
Yeah, we are basically using shrimp pots now. We're not so much in I'm leading up to the data here. Yeah, shrimp pots, and we've been using herring. That's what's been supplied by our low bait provider, South Bend Products, and that works pretty good. We're doing assessment and removal trapping. We trap on, we don't use as many minnows, or we find that the shrimp pots catch more crab. And we're covering a wider area, not as thoroughly in our assessment work, except in areas where the concentrations are on the shoal water and county grounds up north there. As far as data, we count each, we check the traps. They have to be checked every 24 hours. That's a condition of the permit. In order to trap, you have to have a permit or be covered by somebody's permit from Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. We're required to, check the traps every 24 hours, and we have to count how many there are, separate, and also by sex, male, female. We also include how many gravid, date, time, and just any comments that we want to make. And then we are supposed to freeze them and dispose of them either by somebody who maybe wants them for compost. I have a neighbor who has been getting them up to a point. They have an organic garden, or take them to the dump.
So did you talk about the permit at all?
Just roughly, I have a copy of it.
Okay, so I get, in my position, I get calls from the public asking how they can help. And so I think that'd be good to discuss here. So in Willapa Bay, specifically in Washington State, the tidelands are privately owned up here. And they're owned by, longtime family farms that have been farming the same lands for, centuries, or a long time. And it's not easy access out here to get out to these locations. And then the other part of it is the green crabs are now listed as a class
A1 10 or,
A1 noxious invasive species, is that what?
yeah, something, yeah.
So you can't transport them. So one of the new requirements is that you have to have a take permit, a scientific take permit. So I did apply for and get that coverage for the members. And so all the members that are trapping green crabs have a permit that they has, you know, has all the restrictions involved on where they can take them to and transport, how they have to dispose of them, what needs to be recorded when they're trapping them. And so there's not really an opportunity for the public to get involved at this point on the privately owned tidelands. But we're still moving forward. I get every farmer that's trapping submits a trapping data sheet to me at the end of the month, and I submit it to the state so they can see where things are at. And we're starting in our second month in May now of everybody trapping out there, and hoping we start seeing more numbers removed from the bay.
There's a lot of good information on Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife's website on green crab. It's fairly complete.
And so,
And-
yeah, both Sea Grant and Fish and Wildlife have pretty good kind of
Yeah.
launch pad websites. Sea Grants is really good if you're interested in the data. You can
You
see
might
like the
want-
graphs where they've shown what the numbers are and how they've increased. Yeah, the numbers in Willapa Bay and the coast have been here. The green crabs have been here since the late 90s, and they really started shooting up in 2014 and 15, which is the same exact time where the phone numbers from the farmers started increasing on my end, and the emails and the texts. And so we all started seeing them at the same time, and the data showed that too. And hopefully that trend doesn't continue.
What we're hoping to establish is kind of this year, especially as we assess more ground and you know, with the data and the trapping in various areas there, concentrated trapping, is to get a real good idea of their movements. And for instance, there's much more females, Warren and up north, they may be getting 25% females, even more in their traps. And in the assessment areas that we're doing, like last week, in the reclamation area, we got 83 one day and 81 were males. So if you can, you know, if we can locate where the gravid females are this year, and, you know, start focusing on hot spots and also other areas where, you know, concentrated trapping is going to be most effective.
So we're gonna move to the question and answer section, so let's see what's online for.
Oh, I don't know if we have time for questions.
We do.
So far, we don't have any questions in our chat. So folks who are listening in on Zoom, feel free to type those questions in. We can take some folks here right now. Yeah, go ahead.
So I guess I wanted to talk a little bit towards the biology of the invasion, you know, just so everybody understands, we were getting these from up the
Okay.
coast
Yeah.
originally, right? Like, you know, you'll get San Francisco green crab and those larval crabs come up the coast and come to Wills Bay, and initially I thought back in the 90s, they were really seeing like just certain age classes. And I'm wondering, like, are we still seeing that, or we're seeing multiple age classes? How much do we think that are we now getting successful local recruitment? I heard the fact that maybe a little colder water.
Yeah.
They weren't successfully recruiting locally, and most of it was still from distance.
So unfortunately, the way this was set up with kind of a panel, and it was kind of a sit and talk thing, you guys didn't get to hear a lot of the history of behind the green crab invasion and a lot of the stuff that's been going on for, you know, 2 decades now. But so like Tom was mentioning, you know, green crab were first detected, I think, on the Oregon and Washington coast in the late 90s, 97, 98, 99, around that time frame. And there was a couple of professors down at Oregon State that were involved in aquatic invasive species at that time. And they worked together with Brett, who was up here at that time, I think in 2000, and started doing these little spot trapping things. And that's where they detected their first presences of them. And from there, they started getting these data sets. And what they saw was that and I think Sylvia Yamada was the one that reported most of this from Oregon State, is what they saw was that these recruitments from the green crab, I'm going off of memory here, kind of coincided with El Nino events. So they would see a bunch of green crabs, and I mean bunches, like a small handful on these one tidal channel in say Stackpole or Yaquina Bay or Coos Bay or whatever. And they'd all be the same age class, and they all coincided with an El Nino event. So basically the currents were favorable, temperatures for the green crab, which had been established in the Bay Area for much longer on the West Coast. And the thought is that the larvae transported through the water during those El Nino events. And so for, up until 2014 or 15, you could see, if you looked at the data on this, the trapping, that you saw these pulses with a big jump up in these age classes every time there was an El Nino. And then that started to change now. And I haven't got, and I disconnected from the research part of it now, but what I've been told and what I'm seeing on my trapping I'm doing on my own is all size and age classes. And then the other thing, I was in a presentation with somewhere, I was with a presentation with Fish and Wildlife, I believe, and they had presenters from Canada come down. And I think I was told at that meeting that they have a self-sustaining population in Vancouver Island now on the west side there. So that would mean, if I'm correct on that, that would mean that there's possibilities for larval transport from the south and now the north. And the other part of it is that there's a huge amount of funding from the legislature right now for the green crab issue that starts July 1. And when I looked at that, I was definitely concerned because there was very little discussion on Willapa Bay on the coast. And what they're seeing is that, and you know how it is on the coast here, is that once it happens in Puget Sound, we get more recognition down the road kind of thing, unfortunately. But the north end of Puget Sound and the Lumi area there, the Lumi Peninsula, so south of Bellingham, they're starting to see a large number of green crabs there, unbelievably large. And there's a perfect man-made habitat there where they're catching 20, 30, 40,000 or something like that in a year. Is that what it was?
70, 80, it was 80.
So that's a crazy number for one area. And what had traditionally happened was the Strait of the Georgia and the currents, I believe, are keeping the larvae from making it in there. But things have changed enough, so now now they're starting to make it into the north end of the sound. And the way the flows are in the sound, I think there's obviously a huge concern that once the green crab get into the Puget Sound, that things are going to change drastically and they'll be there to stay. Now, to follow up on the next part of that Tom asked, and going off the memory here, I talked to some researchers at UW about, what are the likelihood of them actually surviving here and spawning? Those colder waters up there where they seem to recruit out at would be north of Nakata, Stackpole, Token, in that area. That has a good ocean influence, but can they actually spawn and survive up there? I don't really know the answer to that. No one's told me definitively, but what I have heard is that there are places in the bay that the water circulates slower. So they feel like in the south end of Willapa Bay, as an example, there's like a 4 or 5 day recycle period of water. So if the green crab were to get down in that area in sufficient numbers with that warmer water, then maybe there would be a possibility for a self-sustaining population in that area in Willapa Bay. So that's one of the areas that are being trapped and looked at. And I don't know a huge amount about it other than just the meetings that I get sent to by the farmers. But that's kind of what I know.
We have a question real quick from our chat as well. Matt Winters wanted to know if there's any trapping yet on Willapa spits, and he's wondering specifically about the impacts on razor clams.
Nothing like that's occurring that I'm aware of.
Nope.
And no one's looked at anything with razor clams in that area.
We could.
Oh, there's a really good comment there from Sally Hacker, though. You should read that one out.
Yep. So Sally Hacker is asking about, she's commenting, the genetic research suggests that some green crabs caught in Oregon estuaries are coming from Canada. In addition, we have found for the first time green crabs in the Rocky Intertidal in Oregon.
And we've also seen the Rocky Intertidal here in Washington too, off the Olympic Peninsula and Macaw area. And I think they found one over by the Queets River this last year.
And then Curtis chimed in, so I'll get to you just right after this, Kim, I promise. He said Tom's question about, Year classes seems very important for understanding the green crab demographic. Is anyone measuring the size of crabs in the traps? The spatial distribution may reveal where larval settlement and young of year are concentrating.
Yeah, I can answer.
I can get into that one too. So on the farmer's part of it, and you can chime in if I say something that's not right, but on the farmer's end of it, this is, farmers are working on removal. It's not a research project. We have, a limited amount of time to get out there to the sites and get traps checked and still conduct the workday and get everything done and meet orders. On the other part of that question that Curtis asked, that's really good, is that's the part of the work that I mentioned where I'm working with Fish and Wildlife and Sea Grant, and that's the long-term data sets, and those are all measured, all the crabs are collected, and that is they're actually doing that more research part, looking at the population dynamics. Did I make it up good enough?
Oh,
Were you
perfect.
rolling your eyes?
I was just gonna say, when we started out, we were, a part of the data collection requirements was that we measured every crab. And when we were getting, 20, 30, 40, 50, no problem, 100, yeah, all right. When you start getting into hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, the data collection is more of the problem than the solution.
But that was a really good comment from Sally on there, though, about
Yeah.
the DNA thing. So that just confirms what we talked about last time, is that there's two sources, north and south.
So a question for Warren. So on your 10,000 you've caught, how many Dungeness crab would you estimate you caught at the same time, same crab?
Good question. What we're finding, and you're familiar with the habitat, but these people aren't, so, in the Concord on the north side, where they dredge, there's a sandy bank where it drops off 10, 15 feet, and it comes up, and I have a plan right there. Goes from the high tide line down 300-400 feet, and then it continues on down the coast where they have their oyster shell bags. So when we first put the traps out, we started with the folding traps and just put them everywhere. That, just where are there any crab, where are they at? And what we found was that next to the dredge water, the traps would have 20 or 30 Dungeness crab and no green crab. When you get into the puddles where there's eelgrass or over closer to the oyster seed bags, the traps would be full of green crab and no Dungeness. So what we're finding where we're at, and mind you, our data is from one area and one particular ecosystem and habitat, but they don't commingle much at all where we're at. And it could be, because we haven't eliminated a lot of the possibilities, it could be that if a little Dungeness crab gets in there, they just eat it faster than we check the traps. And I've kind of tried to keep my eye open for that, looking for remnants, but I'm not seeing that. So where we're at, and of course, we're in one of the densest populations in the bay. They're not cohabitating. It doesn't appear. And I'm guessing it's because of competition and that the green crab would eat the Dungeness. I'm really curious about the stomach DNA data, but no. And that's why they want us to check the traps every 24 hours, which is something I'd like to touch on. The reason for that is because of the non-target species, Dungeness crab, sculpin, whatever. I get that. I've been told that the crabs mostly are nocturnal, like the European green crab are mostly nocturnal. So the ideal way to fish them would be to put the traps out before dark and then pick them up in the morning. There's two types a day. Problem is we're trying to be a for-profit operation, and this is a volunteer thing. And even if we get reimbursed by WDFW, I want to say thank you to WDFW publicly for getting these traps and bait to us. That's really helped. It's helped me a lot. And it's brought my numbers up, but the checking them every 24 hours as a volunteer is problematic. Okay, and I get the reasoning behind it, but when you ask shellfish companies that are coming and going and trying to make a living, and we work by the tides which change, you know, the lowest tides of the month are the new and full moon, and so we do different activities then than we do in between, and we work around the weather, and if I was only trapping green crab, I could double my numbers easily. And I could gather a lot more data, but this is a volunteer thing. And I think more shellfish growers should get involved, and as far as just getting the crab out of the bay at this point, which is my priority. I understand the data sets need to be done, and that's being done. I just want to get them out of the bay. And so this 24-hour thing is a tough thing to comply with for us as volunteers. And your original question was Dungeness crab. Where I'm at, we're not seeing both in the traps. It's one or the other. So we get Dungeness crab, we pull that trap, put it over where the green crab are. Yep.
I could add, just, I agree with what Warren was saying, just as last week, we were trapping in the lower Palix off, actually it was off of Miracle in the channel, and also up towards the tidelands there, out in the deeper water, the trap we were pulling had hundreds of them in and virtually no green crab, and then we might move just 100 foot up higher, and there would be very few Dungeness crab. The lower, the deeper it is, the more crab, and they also don't. The more one species, the less of the other.
So, kind of speaking to that, is there any type of a commercial operation that could help fund or not make it a volunteer removal that could step in, some sort of commercial operation with the green crab? Fertilizer, I heard. That could kind of fund this.
That's you, right?
Yeah, it is. We are working with, when I'm saying we, it's a conservation district is working, and Washougal and county, it's a group effort to obtain some of the funding, emergency funding, coastal funding, and we are close to getting a first round of funding, and it's looking optimistic for next 3 months, and then it goes into another cycle. The state funding is what it is there,
Yeah.
and it takes state, but there will be money available.
I want to answer this a little bit. So there's a permitting situation this fall. What people have to understand is that, so getting any funding at all from the state didn't start happening until there was an invasion of European green crab up in the northern part of Puget Sound. And even out of the funding, when it was released, the bulk of the dollars are going there. So out of the whole coast, it is like 20% of the ground.
Oh, you're using to solve this.
And then we have to share the whole sea traffic to the coast. The bulk of the infestation in Puget Sound, unless we're starting to find out, we could be moving out a little bit. But up until that point in time, you made the financial decision, you're looking at what is it, a 940 acre farm?
Oh, you're talking about Lumi Pond, yeah.
850, something 900.
It's like,
something
it's just
that.
it's a man-made sea pond.
Willapa Bay in itself, not even talking about Grace Harbor, Willapa Bay itself is over 90,000 acres. And where we have, our numbers could be even way more than what we even know right now. So when you're talking about commercial operations, when we're trying to fight something, get rid of something, or get the management to understand at a certain point, two of the questions we get always asked is the commercial question, or are they edible? Well, Well, even if you take those questions out, right? The original question is, do we want those things here to supplant the resources that we have already? So, and I understand the question, but when you start allowing like a commercial question or an interval question, then it's like, oh, we're giving up on what we already have. And I understand what you're saying. It's just that we have to combat those questions, and we have to be very careful, because obviously there is a commercial opportunity if they take over. Or edible, from what I've heard, is they are edible, they're not really palatable, and they're very small. So we actually try to move beyond those questions.
Okay, so there's not really a tangible way to make money off of these invaders while we're getting rid of them.
And there's been
So that to
discussions
pay
about,
for the cost.
They've been trapping for
Yeah.
back east. They count them by the ton.
Yeah.
And they still haven't found, they're still haven't developed any viable commercial businesses through them.
So the push is to have state recognize that Willapa Bay is and British Harbor
yes.
are important and need their help.
Yeah, and I think that's occurring.
And I think the way that we're all approaching that with, helping the farmers in every way possible is the best way to do that.
Yep.
And they have the boats already. We're not buying new boats to do this.
Well, we might.
Oh, we might love it. The farmers have a lot of equipment available already to them, so they can get out on the ground, and they know their ground too. When this moves into, a different phase down the road here, right now, everybody's focused on the key tidelands, right? When this moves into that phase, there might be more of Ed's role or other groups to spread out throughout the bay, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife is a big landowner here too.
No, the county is focusing, besides the north part of the bay, which I described earlier, the boundaries with the shoal water, and we're doing as much assessment work as possible in other remote areas of the bay. The ground that they are starting to move into the higher ground, and it's where we have been for years dealing with the remaining Spartina up there, and we have the equipment and the knowledge of the areas up there, and again, we're trying to get a bigger, more a better picture of what's occurring in these other areas outside of the hotspots, and possibly locating new hotspots too.
Garrett's got a question.
Has there been thought given to what the workforce could be? Like, if we thought about like an ideal workforce that's still practical, meaning that you're not covering the daily boat sort of thing, or floats every 2 feet. But the ideal workforce would be desired to kind of hit this as far as you can. And then if yes, if there's some thought to that, we roll into what that cost would be. But just, like when would you may see a depletion on your effort, right? Where you're like having another person chasing them, you're not getting the same return.
I think that my view is that the people whose ground it is are responsible for their own areas, basically. And some areas would require less intense, and first you have to know, the populations. Again, it's a personal responsibility.
It's definitely challenging down here with so many landowners at Willapa Bay on the intertidal grounds. It makes things very challenging. We don't know enough at this point yet of what the best long-term response will be, or how do I even approach that. I don't know if it would be. Right now we've got our group kind of set up where we're communicating regularly with all the big stakeholders down here, and I'm recording where the farmers are trapping at, so people, the managers and the coordinators can see where the numbers are coming from in a general sense. But and then from there we can kind of look at the areas that are getting overlooked. But it's still pretty early stages, and I'm not sure where it's going to.
Yeah, I think it's, sorry, Jim, I just want to answer this a little bit more. So the bell has been rung, and right now, so we got the state put out funding statewide for green crab, which is awesome, because it gets us going, gets us so we can really start thinking about what is the proper management. Level area, hardly with any invasive species. and I'll use Spark China for example, is that when you go from 9,000 acres down to how many acres possibly right now for Spark China?
Quarter, I don't know,
Very
half maybe.
small, but it's not gone. But in the minds of funders and everything like that, they think it is gone. And you have to, it's sometimes you still have to have that continued effort there. And with something like this, we're worried that, okay, it's really big right now, but the legislature thinks in 2-year cycles. And so to constantly ringing that bell to make sure you're still getting. So to kind of get in with your question, Gary, is that sometimes it's also hard to hire people to do things. And then knowing that there's gonna be funding is a little bit. So we have to, if we're gonna have a sustained effort, organized sustained effort, we need to make sure there's still gonna be funding for it too. And I think you know that, but I'm just reiterating that. Kim?
So there's about 10,000 acres of oyster reefs out in the middle of the bay that are public lands.
The reserves.
Reserves. Do we have any good trapping data? It seemed to me that'd be a great refuge for green crab. And do we have any data in those areas?
Like, we've had some traps put out there, but it's not like I wouldn't say we have a coordinated effort to go out and collect data at these locations. But actually, from what I've seen around the people that have been doing some, like, prospecting trapping, is that it hasn't been that high of a density there. There's a couple hotspots in the bay, Warren's the best example of that, but other places it's not nearly that bad.
So then following up on that, so we could probably make some references on the geophysiology of the bay on where these hotspots would be. Let's say there's 10 or 20 of them. If we could sort of do the biology and figure out, well, let's just trap in these areas. Do we know enough that we could say there are X number of hotspots in the bay that we should be focusing on?
What the work that Sea Grant has been doing, and Fish and Wildlife, where they went out and did the broad spectrum trapping throughout the bay, they've kind of identified areas that have higher numbers over short periods of time. And so I think there's an understanding of that, but it's not as defined as what you're thinking.
I think that their knowledge of, they haven't,
But I mean, like,
they've done sentinel sites in a couple of places, but I think that we're getting increased knowledge of where those hotspot or numbers are. Of course, what defines a hotspot? I mean, is it 5 green? Up north it's 1 European green crab, and so anything over 5 in a trap we consider worth hitting more regularly. Again, it comes down to what the gentleman there was saying, numbers and resources, and covering, you got to cover as much ground, covering. Yeah, you could just do what you can do.
I'm gonna go use it. We're waiting for a while. So.
Yeah, thanks. So it sounds like funding, permitting, and even monitoring the research is lagging behind the problem. And with the green crab being third most invasive species around, this obviously could be a huge problem for the fish. So, and other communities have seen a very loss to green crab. So the question I've got is, has anybody out-trapped them? Has anybody trapped them enough to get them under control? And if not, or if so, is there any other control methods that are known for the green crab? And also, as a follow-up question to that, is how are the other estuary and bay areas on the west coast, Pacific Northwest coast, doing with green crab? What's the overall problem, not just here, but the entire city?
Yeah, I feel like we don't have the right representation of speakers on the green crab issue for the whole coast. I mean, I know that there's the green crabs are also increasing heavily in Oregon. In fact, Oregon, has now increased the take limit and for recreational harvest of green crab. That was their approach to it. Every state's a little different. I think they raised it up to 35 per person per day. So obviously, is it 50? So I know that there's a lot of green crab down there now, but I don't know a lot about the issues and impacts down there. Obviously, the shellfish industry is minuscule down there compared to here. The other question is kind of like based on what have the results been of other efforts like this, right? That's kind of how it was. And I've talked to some researchers about this in the past, and I've read a couple papers on it, and it's kind of grim. You know, the stuff I saw was, you know, when you remove all these green crabs at this size class, the next size just moves into it. So, well, you know, we're doing the best we can. We got to do something, is what way I've been telling these guys, but it doesn't, you know, it's not as much promise.
But
Inspiration, let's hear.
yes, I have to be optimistic because I'm gonna lose my job.
And farmers are optimistic.
Lose this war. Yeah, I'm a farmer. We're optimistic under any circumstance, but this, you know, I'm financially vested in this, but it goes beyond that. I grew up on Willapa Bay. Been here my whole life. I love this ecosystem. I'm a sport fisherman, paddling around, collecting firewood, just enjoying the cedar trees on Long Island, all of it. I mean, I know this estuary, I know it intimately. We're talking about losing the estuary. The shellfish industry is a secondary effect. The shellfish industry is important, but it's not the most important thing that we're looking at here. What we have going for us is that I believe we're getting into this, and we're getting into it earlier, and we're hitting it harder than other people have. That has been my approach to this, starting a Facebook page, to start tracking aggressively, putting out every bit of resource I have, quite frankly, to put out this and still run my company. You know, people that have hammers look at everything like a nail. So, me being a farmer, a commercial fisherman, I'm looking at how do I get the most crab out of the bay in the shortest amount of time right now. I look at every gravid female that myself and my crew pull out of the bay as a gold coin. Okay, that I have saved us a lot of work in the future. I truly believe, and I've talked to biologists, Jennifer, Alexandra, it doesn't matter who it is. They have hope, which just gives me more energy to this. We have the data set, we started early, and we're hitting it hard. WDFW has been great about getting tracks to shellfish growers because we know the bay. We have the boats, we're here, we can get out and attack it immediately. And I really look at this like a forest fire. And in that, you know, if you get enough resources on a forest fire soon enough, you can contain it. Once it gets away, then you have to let it burn. You can't do anything. No amount of resources are available to stop it. And quite literally, that's the best metaphor I can come up with, because I think we're still at the point where we can stop this. And I have no reason to believe that we're not. And I don't, eradication is not an option, but control is. I believe that. I truly believe it. I have to believe it. And I'm putting my money, my mouth, my resources into this as a volunteer to save the bay. I can do other things to make a living. I'm not going to go broke if this bay gets destroyed. But Willapa Bay is a unique ecosystem. We don't have any industry, large industry on it, not even a big fish. It's unique in a lot of ways. It's a Dungeness estuary, salmonoids, the eelgrass in Willapa Bay, everywhere else, they're trying to save eelgrass. Eelgrass is filthy thick in Willapa Bay. We have such a biodiverse ecosystem. That is what we have to save here. That is what we're trying to save.
So real quick, WDFW has, has it from NOAA, that there is an introduction point, then there's the exponential growth of the numbers. But there is phases in there where you have a saturation rate and the introduction rate point. Then there's this growth area. We're still really early in the growth area. A lot of other areas were already, before they started doing something, they're already at the saturation point. So we're trying to, like Warren's saying, is trying to get in the beginning to try to hammer it as much as we can so we can make it so it's manageable, stay down at this management point. So we're gonna go try to make sure that we get everybody's questions asked, because I believe you had your hand up, and I know Connie did, and Brian.
Sure, yeah, I wanted to return back to the biology question. I think it's a really important one because we're doing such a great job on doing the collection of the animals that are adults. But I'm thinking about, so what are the Zoea larvae feeding on? And we're addressing the adult population, but maybe it would make sense to do some work at the larval stage. So we work on management principles around that stage and get it earlier, because I know once that we've got invasive species, they get in, it is so hard to get them out. So maybe we start a little earlier, that might be worth consideration. And I have a follow-up suggestion I get for that, but want to see, does that make sense? Is there any work?
Yeah, and we've done that with other invasive species or looking at them, but I'm gonna do one of you guys want to jump on that one, or?
I mean, so that's a really tough question that you asked about. How do you, one, even monitor the green crab larvae? I don't even know if that's being done. And then how could you impact recruitment by focusing on larvae? Is that kind of one of the things you're thinking of?
Maybe it's, this is a great opportunity for a PhD thesis at the University of Washington Marine Biology Station. Maybe there's someone there, they do such an awesome job. Maybe there's an effluent that we're releasing that could create some food for this selected. I mean, you still know, so maybe that's an idea.
Sea grant.
Yeah.
And I was just.
They would be the ones to contact.
Yeah, so I do know from Alex Stowe, talking to Sea Grant there's the beginnings of those efforts. But when you're to try not get to the saturation point, we have to start attacking at that adult level right now. Like I said, we're so early in the phase of really ramping this up. We got to tackle what's directly in front of us. Then like any kind of military battle, then you start strategizing how to win the war. And we've done that with burrowing shrimp. They've looked at, the juveniles versus adults and everything. We'll get there. But right now we got to focus on really hammering it a bit and still having the research going. And then hopefully the research can help us win the battle. But
that was a good point though. The traps they're using, they're getting a lot of crabs, but they're getting a lot of big crabs. And really, we need to be looking at the 1-year-olds that just recruited the size classes.
So Connie, did you have a question?
Yeah, I thought about Oregon allowing people to get permits and trap. Is there a downside to that? Why don't we do that in Washington?
Well, I'm not a resource manager for Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, so I can't go into that too much. But the problem with that kind of effort in general would be the transport of an invasive species to new locations, right? And the other problem would be incentivizing it. It's kind of like, people ask about a bounty program. Well, these crabs are worth $5 a piece, maybe at a certain size, maybe you should grab green crabs and grow them to that size. So that's another reason why, as an example of why there's not a bounty in Oregon or Washington, or that kind of approach. I've talked to people about eating them, and I get that question fairly regularly from when I talk to the public. And I think that if you got them while they bolted, you could eat them whole as a soft shell type thing. But in general, I haven't seen anything other than like a stock type of situation. But also, do you live in Oregon or Washington? Do you ever eat red rock crab? Because the Dungeness veteran are easier to get, they're bigger. That's kind of how I look at it. So we don't have any good pictures, so unfortunately, I just wasn't prepared for this one. But an adult green crab, for size references, legs, body, and everything, about that big. So they're really small, and the legs are, really puny. I mean, that's why they're eating them whole. Does that help you at all? Kind of answer the question.
I'm going to get back to you, but I'm going to go to Brian next.
Okay, first, just a comment, you mentioned getting them at the larval stage. I think we want to get them before they become larvae. 250,000 larvae from the crab, we can catch 250,000 larvae on the neutrino, my thought, but it was a good question. But there seems to be some money gonna flow to possibly hire people. For efficiency's sake, it seems to me that we've got a whole bunch of people working on the bay right now who are trying to make a living simultaneously. Is there a way to buy some of their time while they're out there working to trap green crab?
Yeah.
So, yeah,
It's occurring.
okay,
We're starting to do that.
excellent.
So at the end of the month of April, the farmers that trapped green crab submitted timesheets to me and all the expenses they incurred during the month of April for reimbursement. And that's
I
been
mean,
put in
they've got
place.
the boats, the
Yeah.
transportation, they know the bay.
Yeah, so there's funding available currently and hopefully long-term for them to do that. I mean, there's always gonna be a labor shortage here. And it takes them away from their day jobs, but there's money, gas money and all that available.
The funding has been approved. We're waiting for actually somebody to sign the first check and send it to the Conservation District, which applications will be paid. Oyster growers will start receiving compensation for the hours and yeah.
I want to say, when that happens, I'm saying when now, because I used to say if. When that happens, they're compensating me for what it's costing me. Okay, that's still a zero net sum. Understood. Okay, so I'm happy to have that as opposed to going in the hole like I have been. It's nice to come up with zero on this project. But yeah, if I was, people like Ed Darcher's experience, and if you get more people.
I was just gonna go into that one of the things we're talking about is that, like if you work out on a hayfield, you can hire a young kid, give him some instruction, and at some point it's just sheer labor. Working out in the bay is very much different because you got to know it's the bay. You got to know how to be out there. There's a whole learning level of that. How many boat operators do we actually have? That's another issue. So it's not like you can just hire people and just put an army out there.
And fish.
We only have so many people we can train, and we have to get them trained and know the area. So like David, you're going to say WDFW is going to be hiring.
They're going to be
6
hiring.
people, but even them, they're going to be, they're not going to know the bay. They're going to be seasonal, and there's going to be a level of training time. It's not the same as having, some of these, like a grower or Ed or somebody that knows the area and has already been, has that institutional memory. Even without green crab, they've already been out there doing, a lot of other different things. So like I said, we're still ramping up.
I was curious, so, the big focus is trapping the green crabs. For the shellfish growers, are there other management practices that you feel could be implemented that could help the issue?
Management practices,
You were kind of alluding to, you feel like maybe some of those oyster bags could be, harboring these? Is there different?
yeah, as far as changing our farming practices, that's a good question. There again, we're too early into this to know. I would counter that maybe it's good that they're doing this and we're drawing crab in one area. Okay, because myself and 2 other gentlemen that work for me have been able to catch over 10,000 crab in our spare time. And so maybe it's good that maybe the reason the numbers are so high is they're crawling in from the peripheral areas to come in. We don't know I don't know, on a yearly basis, maybe the crab move into this area to feed this time of year. Maybe they move on our clam beds in the fall, after the clams have not big enough that they can come in and they're worth eating. But I think we're still too early to know if we could change farming practices. And what I know about the green crab is that they're gonna find something to eat. This is what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, that until there's nothing to eat, they're gonna eat whatever's there. At this point, I'm kind of glad that I stumbled into the hotspot that I did, because I've been able to have a huge impact, quite frankly.
So we're out of time. We're actually a little over, which is okay. So back here is NRCS, so I know where his brain's thinking. He's trying to think of a practice they can create to help solve the issue. I have talked to David Rose and Bobette, so that conversation's already started. So before we wrap up here, we're gonna go to lunch. I wanted to say that look at WDFW, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, or Washington Sea Grant's website, and just go Sea Grant, and then that put European green crab, and you'll automatically get links there. There's also, if you're on Facebook, you can go to
Willapa, green crab
disaster. And not only we get some information or possibly some links, but
Like it's on Facebook.
there's really a lot of photos that you could look at of how, what it looks like, how bad it is, and you gotta get updates. I have liked that page, so whatever comes up, and I just share it out. So those are some opportunities. And to reemphasize, I know Alexander's probably gonna say the same thing, I'm gonna give it back to him, but Derek's still gonna be here, so if you want to ask some questions, feel free to.
If anybody has any, I'm gonna hang a while if anybody wants to.
I also want to make one last announcement about this part of the conference in general, because I want to say a special thank you to these gentlemen, because this was a last minute change and they not only stepped up, but also facilitated a great conversation for us. So I do want to say a special thank you to you guys. All right, and that being said, we are gonna go ahead and break for lunch. So we're gonna have a make your own sandwich bar with chips, still drinks over here. And we will reconvene around 1 o'clock for our hybrid beach grass talk. So yeah, Tom, do you have something to add?
I just wanted to remind people to keep thinking about the 3 questions that.
Yes, most certainly, definitely. I appreciate that, Tom.
Where's the cake?
Yeah.